Good morning. I'm Savannah Sellers.
And I'm Joe Fryer.
We begin this morning with the latest on that breaking news overnight in Indianapolis. At least 8 people were killed after a gunman opened fire inside a FedEx facility there. Upon arriving at the scene, police say in addition to those killed, they located multiple victims with injuries consistent with gunshot wounds. 5 people were transported to hospitals. At least 1 is in critical condition.
Earlier this morning, we heard from an eyewitness who says he was working at that FedEx facility when the shooting happened. Here's his account of what happened.
The man did have an AR in his hand, and he started shouting, and then he started firing at random directions. But at first, it was at his right. And I thought he saw me, and so I immediately ducked for cover.
Let's bring in early today anchor Philip Mena, who is covering the latest details of the shooting for us. So, Philip, police say preliminary information suggests that the alleged shooter took his own life at the scene as soon as officers arrived. What more are police saying about the shooting, and any update on the victims right now?
Well, good morning, Joe. It is still a very active situation there in Indianapolis. But so far, police have said that just before midnight, they got a call about that active shooter situation. They arrived to find 8 people dead on the scene. They also found the shooter dead nearby from an apparent suicide. Several other people went to the hospital with injuries. We do know that at least one of them is in critical condition. Overnight, FedEx released a statement about the shooting. We want to show that to you right now. It says, our most heartfelt sympathies are with all of those affected by this senseless act of violence. The safety of our team members is our top priority, and we are fully cooperating with investigating authorities.
Philip, police have set up a reunification area for employees and families. And as Joe asked a moment ago, we know that we don't know a lot about the victims, but how are people there handling what has unfolded?
Well, as you can imagine, Savannah, the family members there are very concerned, very anxious. They have gathered at a nearby Holiday Inn. The victims' assistance unit is there, as well as a chaplain. They're helping to console, comfort families while they await that word on their loved ones. So you can imagine a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty. And keep in mind, phones are not allowed on that facility floor. So the employees there, they were out of contact with their loved ones. And many families just now waking up to this dreadful news.
And Philip, we do expect to hear more from police this morning, right?
Yes, Joe, there is a scheduled press conference at 10:30 later this morning. That's Eastern time. But the victims' families, they are being updated every 30 minutes. But as far as any other information about the shooter or any possible motive, we're going to find out a little bit more coming up at 10:30 Eastern.
All right, Philip Mena, thank you so much for keeping us up to date on this big breaking story. We are hearing chilling accounts from those who witnessed the shooting in Indianapolis. Here's more of what employee Levi Miller told the Today Show this morning.
I was eating some food with my friends and another friend of ours. This was when we heard 2 gunshots from inside the building, and I did not witness anyone enter. I hear 3 shots after that, and I assume someone has an engine problem. This is when I hear 6 shots fired rapidly, and then I hear 10 shots. This is when I stand up, and I'm sitting on a bench. And so when I stand up, I see a man, a hooded figure. I was unable to see his face in detail. However, the man did have an AR in his hand, and he started shouting, and then he started firing at random directions. But at first, it was at his right. And I thought he saw me, and so I immediately ducked for cover. My friend at the time witnessed a man who was not a part of the incidents, but he also pulled out a gun from his trunk to try and engage the shooter, and he died because of it. From what I do know, one of my known coworkers there have told me that this is a well-known worker at this facility, and that from what I heard, the man shot himself when police arrived.
Let's bring in Clint Watts, Distinguished Research Fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute and NBC News national security analyst and contributor. Clint, thank you for being here to help us make sense of, put in context this disturbing and heartbreaking news this morning. We're hearing more there from that victim than we've heard from any type of police presence or investigators there. But when you hear what that witness said about what they saw inside that facility, what are the questions that you're expecting to get answers to at that 10:30 press conference?
I would expect them to probably name the shooter, since it sounds like he's already killed himself. It appears from that interview this morning as most likely a workplace shooting. I think you're seeing discussions about the FBI, being at the scene. I think that's really in two parts. One, they're trying to make sure there's no larger nexus, no larger plot, and there's no indications of that at this point. But they also have the capacity to handle a crime scene like this. This is a major crime scene. It sounds like there were a lot of rounds discharged. And from other news reports, it seems like the incident probably only took 1 to 2 minutes. So remember, we try and respond very quickly now with our law enforcement to get out in front of these mass shootings. It seems like they probably were not even hardly aware of this incident before it was really coming to its end, and so had little chance to probably respond to it. I think the big questions will be motive. They'll be trying to identify why this individual did this. I think it speaks to the broader issue that we have in this country. This is our 5th mass shooting in 5 weeks. If you just look back to Atlanta, Boulder, Southern California, South Carolina, the fatalities, the killings that have occurred just in recent weeks is shocking and astounding. And we're just now starting to exit the pandemic. Part of the reason we didn't have these kinds of mass shootings in large part over the last year is because there were not a lot of large gatherings. There were very few places. This comes at a FedEx facility that was probably an essential part of keeping our country running over the last year. These are probably workers who have really, put their hearts out there, really, worked for this country over the last year. So it's a very sad day for the country.
Clint, the witness there, Levi Miller, did note that he thought the suspect had an AR, an assault rifle. We still don't have confirmation from authorities about what type of weapon the suspect had, but they're obviously going to be looking into that. What are the questions you have about the weapon, and why is it so important to answer those questions?
That's right. The first question is going to be, was the weapon purchased legally, and were there any signs? So let's rewind back 20 years to after 9/11. We would be trying to identify precursors or signals or warnings that somebody was purchasing a weapon and then wanting to instantaneously use it. You might remember the Virginia Tech shooting, some of those in the late 90s. I think the next part that we'll be looking to ask is, were there other precursors, but why do we continue to let this go? Part of the reason so many shots were fired, so many people were killed, and so many people were wounded is because the person has the equivalent of a military-grade weapon that they are able to legally buy and bring into one of their workplaces. There's a reason why you don't see these kinds of mass shootings in places like Europe. It's very rare. It has to come from someone stealing a weapon or bringing a weapon in from out of the country. And it just really speaks to the number of deaths we've had in this country. Despite the pandemic last year, I'm pretty sure it was the most deadly year for shootings in U.S. history. That was last year, and we were not at mass gatherings. So it's been my concern going all the way back to the start of this year that as the pandemic ends, as we start to open back up, as we see domestic extremism on the rise and people with these weapons, it could be a very deadly and dangerous summer for the United States.
Clint, one of the things that we've been noting this morning is that the fact that there were not phones allowed on the floor there for these employees. They're on the floor working. They're not supposed to have their phones with them. Many times after an event like this, we see cell phone footage. We see video of what may have happened or the aftermath. And also, of course, during something like this, a cell phone is how many of the people who are in there are able to communicate with their family members. We know there's this family reunification center, but we don't yet know who has been made aware if they've lost someone, a member of their family. Does it complicate things at all from an investigation perspective or from this reunification perspective that the witnesses in there and the victims in there did not have their cell phones with them?
I think it has some strengths and weaknesses to that strategy. One thing to consider is I would imagine at a FedEx facility or most of these business facilities, they do have internal closed circuit television. They do have their own monitoring system. So in terms of an evidence perspective, I'm sure they probably had some way to diagnose this case. I would also add that in the social media era, part of what drives this contagion, this repeated call to violence, people wanting to take up arms, is because they are watching and viewing it on television or social media. The more you see something, the more it tends to take people that maybe were considering such a plot and push them a little bit further towards the edge of wanting to do it. So it's that contagion effect that we see with a lot of mass casualty incidents around the world related to extremism in some cases and not in others. You might remember there was an individual who tried to drive his car into the Capitol just, I believe, 2 weeks ago, but seemed to have no motive for why he was going towards the Capitol. That is likely some sort of a contagion effect. In terms of the public safety, it does seem that they had some sort of plan, so I don't want to speak to that. It seems like they were developing a plan for that. I don't know, to be honest, what the safety plan would have been or how that might have been accentuated by people having immediate access to their phone.
All right, Clint Watts, thank you so much. Now to Chicago, where this morning outrage is growing across the city and beyond over the police killing of a 13-year-old boy. Chicago police say Adam Toledo was holding a gun, which he tossed away milliseconds before an officer opened fire. But new body cam video just released shows the boy's hands were raised and empty when he was shot. NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis joins us now from Chicago with more on the fallout from the images that the city's mayor called excruciating. Good morning.
Good morning. To lose a child under any circumstance is hard, but for Adam Toledo's family, this is almost unbearable. And as you point out, the warning to our viewers, the images you're about to see are very disturbing. Overnight, pain in the streets of Chicago over the deadly encounter captured on dramatic police body camera video. An officer responding to reports of shots fired in the early morning hours of March 29th begins chasing 13-year-old Adam Toledo on foot.
Stop right now! Hands! Show me your hands! Drop it! Drop it!
The teenager shot in the chest. The officer radioed for help and applied CPR.
Where you shot, man? Where you shot? Stay with me. Stay with me.
Later, Toledo was pronounced dead at the scene. The city's Civilian Office of Police Accountability now investigating, releasing police records from that night, which state Toledo was armed with a weapon. In an edited police video, they say a gun was found at the scene and say Toledo threw it away seconds before being shot. The family's lawyer says none of that matters.
The officer screamed at him, "Show me your hands." Adam complied, turned around. His hands were empty when he was shot in the chest.
Those same documents identify the officer who fired his weapon as 34-year-old Eric Stillman. Attorneys who represent the officer say in a statement their client was faced with a life-threatening and deadly force situation. Overnight, former Washington, D.C. police chief and Philadelphia police commissioner Charles Ramsey saying the officer's actions were reasonable.
In my opinion, tragic as it was, the shooting was reasonable. It was less than a second, literally less than a second from the time the officer saw that gun in his hand to the time he fired that shot.
Chicago's mayor telling reporters she's seen no evidence that the teen shot at police, but would not say if she believed Toledo was holding a weapon. The mayor growing emotional when talking about the video.
No parent should ever have a video broadcast widely of their child's last moments. Much less be placed in a terrible situation of losing their child in the first place.
Put your hands behind your back.
All right.
Also at the scene that night, 21-year-old Reuben Roman, arrested and charged with reckless discharge of a firearm and endangerment of a child whose mother is now grieving.
They couldn't shoot his leg, his arm, up in the air. I don't know, but that killed my baby.
Officials say Toledo's family was shown the body camera video in private earlier this week. Later, the family agreed these images should be shared with the public. As for the officer involved in the shooting, Chicago Police Superintendent says Officer Stillman has been placed on administrative duties for 30 days. Savannah?
Thank you so much.
New developments now in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer charged in the death of George Floyd. The defense has rested its case without Chauvin taking the stand. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now with the latest details from inside the courtroom. Gabe, good morning.
Joe, good morning. We're seeing more of a National Guard presence here in downtown Minneapolis as the jury prepares to begin deliberations on Monday. All of this comes after another day of high drama inside the courtroom.
This morning, after 14 days of testimony, the murder trial of Derek Chauvin is entering a new phase.
The evidence is now complete for this case.
The defense resting after Chauvin answered one of the trial's biggest questions, speaking unmasked for the first time in court.
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
Telling the judge without the jury in the room that he would not testify, avoiding the risk of cross-examination.
Is this your decision not to testify?
It is, Your Honor.
In all, Chauvin's defense called 7 witnesses over 2 days, trying to make the case that George Floyd died from drugs and poor health, not the ex-cop's knee on his neck for more than 9 minutes. On Thursday, prosecutors tried to introduce new evidence, a blood test that specifically measured the carbon monoxide in Floyd's body. The judge did not allow it, scolding prosecutors for waiting until the last minute.
If he even hints that there are test results that the jury has not heard about, it's going to be a mistrial. Pure and simple.
Instead, the prosecution called one rebuttal witness back to the stand. Dr. Michael Tobin, the world-renowned pulmonologist, disagreed with a defense expert who testified exhaust from the police squad car could have been one of the contributing factors in Floyd's death.
No, I believe it is not reliable.
Closing arguments are now set for Monday. Then the case will go to the jury, which will be sequestered.
If I were you, I would plan for long and hope for short.
With tighter security across downtown Minneapolis, tension is mounting.
What are your emotions right now heading into next week?
Honestly, I'm very anxious. This case is in the jury hands. We just wait for the end result, basically.
Today, the prosecution, the defense, and the judge will be hammering out the exact language for jury instructions. Savannah and Joe.
Gabe, thank you so much.
Outside of Minneapolis in the suburb of Brooklyn Center, Kim Potter, the former police officer charged with second-degree manslaughter in the shooting death of Dante Wright, appeared before a judge for the first time. NBC News correspondent Morgan Chesky joins us now from Brooklyn Center, where overnight protesters took to the street once again. Morgan, good morning.
Yeah, Savannah, good morning. And they certainly did. And Potter had little to say in this first short meeting with the judge. But for the hundreds who converged on this very street behind me in front of the Brooklyn Center Police Department, there was plenty to say. Calls for justice and cries for change. 5 days after the death of Dante Wright.
Overnight, an all too familiar frustration. Crowds of protesters packing streets in Brooklyn Center.
Dante Wright!
The city on edge following the death of 20-year-old Dante Wright, killed at the hands of ex-officer Kim Potter. The 48-year-old appeared in court for the first time Thursday, charged with second-degree manslaughter, and now facing up to 10 years in prison. Wright's own family watching the hearing over Zoom in pain.
To see her sitting there and knowing that we're going to the funeral home in a little bit to go see my son for the first time.
This chilling body camera video released Monday shows Wright's final moments during a deadly traffic stop. Potter shouting taser 3 times before firing her gun instead. Her former police chief Tim Gannon calling it an accident. Earlier this week, both Potter and Gannon resigned. Prosecutors say Potter failed to protect the public when she used her firearm rather than her taser, resulting in Wright's unlawful killing.
This is a taser. But no, my nephew was killed with this, a Glock.
For Wright's own grieving parents, justice starts with accountability.
What I hope comes out of this, I'm not going to get, and that's my son back. Accountability is what we're demanding, and that's what we're hoping for.
And this morning, Potter's attorney is declining to comment. We know the next court date for that former police officer is set for May 17th. Meanwhile, the funeral for Dante Wright, now set for next Thursday, in Minneapolis. I'll send it back to you.
Morgan, thanks so much.
The U.S. is on track to give out 200 million vaccine doses by the end of this weekend. Even though an average of 3 million people are getting shots a day, coronavirus cases have risen 11% in the past 2 weeks. NBC's Tom Costello joins us now from Washington with more on why cases are rising and why some states are seeing higher surges. Tom, good morning.
Yeah, hey, Joe. So there's a combination of reasons here. Experts say a lot of people have mask fatigue. They're not wearing the mask anymore. They're doing the indoor dining thing. We also have a lag effect from spring break. People are now sick after going on spring break. But more importantly, younger people are now the ones who are getting sick. And we are seeing this UK variant dominant across the country. It spreads more easily. Meanwhile, senior citizens, the elderly, for the most part, they have already been vaccinated. Across the country on this Friday, a spring wave of rising infections. While more than 3 million Americans are being vaccinated every day, hospitals in several states are at or near capacity. Hospitalizations reaching 47,000, the most since March 4th. In Maine, new infections have shot up by 67% just over the past 2 weeks. While in Michigan, frontline health workers are warning the current surge could actually be worse than what they experienced last fall.
And now they are experiencing and seeing younger people who are in our ICU beds who are very, very sick and some who are dying.
The latest spike comes at a bad time amid a pause in the J&J vaccine rollout as the FDA and CDC look at a small number of patients who developed rare blood clots. The CDC also reports a very small number of so-called breakthrough cases, people who contracted COVID despite getting vaccinated. So far, 5,800 known cases, most of them women. 40% involved people over the age of 60. 7% had to be hospitalized. 1%, 74 people, died. Ariel Silver got COVID 6 weeks after her second vaccine dose.
Were you surprised? What was your reaction when you got it, despite having had the vaccine?
I was very surprised because I thought being fully vaccinated, I would not get it. For 2 days, I was in bed very sick, just sleeping all day. I had to cancel all my work phone calls. It hit me hard, for sure.
Even though the Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J vaccines offer strong protection, experts say no vaccine is 100% effective. Now, Pfizer's CEO says COVID protection probably doesn't last more than a year. All of us, therefore, will probably need booster shots.
A likely scenario is that there will be likely a need for a third dose somewhere between 6 and 12 months.
6 and 12 months is what he says there. What we don't know yet is whether you and I are going to need the same vaccine booster shot as the vaccine that we got originally. In other words, if you had Pfizer, can you get Moderna as your second booster shot? We simply don't know yet. That's going to be determined down the road. But one challenge here is that without the J&J vaccine, there simply is, as you know, a global shortage of vaccine. Not in the United States, but globally, it's really hitting at a bad time. Guys, back to you.
Tom Costello, thank you so much.
While the Biden administration is ramping up pressure on Russia with new sanctions, the president is also calling for de-escalation. President Biden is discussing an in-person summit with Vladimir Putin as early as this year. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker joins us now with more. Kristen, good morning.
Hey, Savannah, good morning to you. This move by the Biden administration slapped financial sanctions on nearly 36 Russian individuals and entities, and also included the expulsion of 10 officials from the Russian embassy here in Washington. This morning, we're getting new reaction and fallout. New tensions this morning between the United States and Russia over newly imposed sanctions by the Biden administration, targeting Russia over its efforts to interfere in U.S. elections and formally naming Russia's intelligence service in connection to the sweeping SolarWinds hack that infiltrated government agencies and private companies.
I was clear with President Putin that we could have gone further, but I chose not to do so. I chose to be proportionate.
President Biden speaking Thursday, also underscoring the fine line he needs to walk when it comes to Russia, a country he still needs to work with on an array of issues, including nuclear treaties and other foreign entanglements. The president announcing during a call with Vladimir Putin, he discussed a possible summer meeting in Europe.
There's an interest in the United States to work with Russia. We should and we will.
Former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, suggesting the meeting could be done on a smaller scale.
That means we all fly to Geneva or Vienna and we look for tea leaves, and there's not going to be any deliverables. So I would have downplayed it.
Even with a possible summit in the coming months, President Biden signaled the posture to Putin and Russia will be different from his predecessor, former President Trump, who critics say undermined his own administration's actions and intelligence findings when it came to Russia, with his frequent praise of Putin.
President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Although former President Trump also imposed sanctions against Russia. On Capitol Hill, mixed reaction.
Even though Congress, on a bipartisan basis, passed the bill to put sanctions, he chose different sanctions and a weakness.
Now, President Biden will put the focus on foreign policy again today. He's going to meet with the Prime Minister of Japan. They'll discuss everything from China, the threat from North Korea, and even the Olympics. And we'll hear from the two leaders a little bit later on today when they hold a joint news conference in the Rose Garden. Savannah.
Kristen, thank you so much. Time now for a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Bill Carrington is back with us. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. My brother just sent me a picture from upstate New York with snow covering his lawn. And in response, I sent him a picture of me putting sunscreen on my arm.
Oh, you're mean.
Yeah, it was deserved. But yeah, let's talk snow, because it's not just in the Northeast and New England. We actually have two snowstorms on the map in the middle of April. We have the one right here, a big one too, that's right in the middle of Colorado, and it's snowing in Nebraska, it's snowing in central Kansas. This one's also going to bring some heavy rain to our friends in Louisiana who already are dealing with some flooding problems, and those line of showers and storms are right over New Orleans. And then here's the April nor'easter that's already produced as much as 7 inches of snow in some of the higher elevations of Vermont and Massachusetts. That's going to continue for much of the day. It missed areas from about Hartford southwards. New York City's been fine. Same with Philadelphia. But all of that snow and nasty weather will be up around Boston, especially the suburbs, during the day. So additional snowfall, mostly confined now to Vermont and New Hampshire. And we will see some power outages because it's a heavy, wet snow. And here's all the flooding problems. We have a flash flood watch. Southern Mississippi near Mobile, also in Alabama, and a good section there of Louisiana. So for today's forecast, little mix of everything on the map, kind of a typical April, almost like middle of April map where you got some snow, you got some heat, and we got a lot of everything.
Very April. Now I know you're going to go help shovel now, right? Is that the plan?
Better get up to upstate.
I just got to think of smarter things and say to my brother.
I like the sunscreen. That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks. Have a good weekend. Coming up, Michigan faces an uphill battle as coronavirus cases continue to surge.
Why Johnson & Johnson's vaccine pause could hit the state's rural communities the hardest. Next. As Michigan grapples with a devastating new surge in coronavirus cases, healthcare workers are now working without an important vaccine. The state had big plans for the Johnson & Johnson shot before it was paused, with those in hard-to-reach rural communities expected to benefit the most. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber joins us now from Alpena, Michigan. So, Ellison, for rural communities there, the J&J vaccine was an important tool, different from Pfizer and Moderna, right?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So Johnson & Johnson really opened a lot of doors, especially for rural communities, not only here in Michigan, but really across the country. In a lot of rural communities, hospitals, doctors' offices, if they're there, they're small. They often did not have those super expensive freezers that were necessary to store the Pfizer vaccine and sometimes even the Moderna vaccine, not to mention they were having to ask patients to drive often 30, 40 minutes each way just to get a vaccine. That's not always feasible for people to do once, much less twice. Just to give you a sense of how spread out things are here, let me show you this map. So we're in Alpena right now, kind of the bigger city center area, if you will, here in Northeast Michigan. It's kind of down here in the Midland area. So Alpena, we're at a hospital, a doctor's office area in town, but we've spoken to a lot of people who live out in all these areas where for them to get even to a vaccine clinic in this area is going to be really difficult because getting to town can be quite a hike for many people. So places like Mid-Michigan Medical Center decided that maybe they could reach more people faster by packing up the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and just making those drives to administer the vaccine in people's homes. Listen here.
for us, it is reaching that population of people who may not have access to a vaccine, and how do we get that to them in these rural communities. It could be 15, 20, 30 miles to a vaccine center. And this is not 15, 20 miles on a freeway. This is potentially two-track roads, the dirt roads, poorly traveled. So there's the distance to travel. It's just the access issue that really becomes a barrier.
So doctors and nurses are taking the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, or at least they were, in what is essentially a beer cooler, and then also taking a duffel bag like this one. I'll show you what's inside it. It's pretty much a vaccine clinic in a bag. They have Benadryl in case anybody were to have some sort of reaction. The gloves, the syringes, the disposal for the syringes, all the things you would need to give a vaccine. But instead of asking people to drive 30, 40 minutes each way, they are able to do this in people's homes. And because Johnson & Johnson is not as volatile or as temperamental, if you will, as the other COVID vaccines that are available in the United States, this sort of thing was a whole lot easier when Johnson & Johnson was a tool in their toolkit. Joe?
Ellison, I know you made the drive. You visited with some of the people who have benefited from this program. What did they have to say about it? And has anyone now had to have their appointments canceled because of what's happening with J&J?
Yeah, so they just started this program where they'd gotten everything together to go out to people who were identified as homebound and who really had a lot of obstacles, be it health related or simply just a lack of funds, cars, transportation to get to a vaccination clinic. So they'd already gone out and vaccinated about 50 people at home. They had plans to vaccinate 30 more on Monday, but now all of that has been stopped. We met two brothers who were part of that group that did get vaccinated a couple weeks ago. Here's some of what they told us. How much easier is it having somebody just come to y'all?
So much easier. Oh, yes. I don't have to have someone give me a ride because I don't have the automobile.
So for that brother there, his name's Robert McMahon, he told me he has spot memory loss. So if he makes an appointment to go to the doctor's office, he often just simply forgets to go. He also does not have a car. He can't afford to buy one, even if he wanted one. He gets Meals on Wheels delivered every single week because he can't even get to the grocery store on his own. He lives a good 30, 45 minutes away from here each way. So for him, there really was very little likelihood that he could get vaccinated, even though he wanted to, if he had to come into town. So that was a huge opportunity for him that he could get vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson. And now there are other people who are in similar positions, Joe, that can't as long as this pause lasts.
Yeah, folks all around the country in that position. Ellison, thank you so much. Appreciate your reporting.
Now let's bring in Dr. Aditi Narukar, a physician at Harvard Medical School. Good morning, doctor. Now, we just talked about the effects the pause on J&J distribution is having in Michigan. Now, that state is seeing the highest rise in cases in the country. But how do you think the pause is affecting the U.S. as a whole?
It's a great question. You know, we are going to see Johnson & Johnson at this time. It supplies about 5% of the vaccines in the U.S. So we're not going to see such a big impact with vaccine supply. We know that with Moderna and others, we're seeing a ramp up. Each vial of the Moderna vaccine, for example, is 50% more doses. So we're going to be able to make this up. It's not going to be a supply issue in the long term, but certainly in the short term, it is a big issue.
Now, in Europe, Poland is actually going to keep administering the one-shot doses on the premise that the benefits outweigh the risks, which we've heard a lot about. We know that we're hearing it's more likely you're going to get COVID or get a blood clot from COVID than this shot. But what do you think about that move?
That's actually a very smart move. You know, there's various countries in the European Union. The European Medicines Agency has left it up to the individual countries to decide. So countries like Germany and Spain and Italy are rolling out the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to those over 60, and in France and Belgium to those over 50. We may see something similar happening in the U.S. after the April 23rd CDC meeting. Having COVID increases the risks of these blood clots by 100-fold. So when we do the risk-benefit ratio, it is a good idea to give the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to prevent the risk. The risk is very, very low, 6 cases out of 7 million, compared to the risk of getting COVID and the 100-fold increase that we can see with these clots.
Doctor, I want to now talk about what's called breakthrough infections. That's people who actually end up getting COVID-19 after they're fully vaccinated. 5,800 fully vaccinated people have gotten COVID-19, but I want to keep in context that's out of nearly 77 million people. So this is actually good news. And those people who got it were mostly asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, which basically makes it sound like this is working. But how sick are these people getting? How is this happening if they have been fully vaccinated?
That's a great question, Savannah. No vaccine is 100%, and 5,800 cases out of 77 million, like you said, is a great statistic. The goal of the vaccine is to prevent severe illness, hospitalizations, and death. And like you said, most of these people who have gotten COVID after being fully vaccinated have very mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. This is a positive sign. It tells us that the vaccine is working, and it's something to be expected. No vaccine is 100%.
That is all great news. Dr. Narukar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
With the growing surge of unaccompanied minors at the U.S.-Mexico border, thousands of migrant families are having a hard time reuniting with loved ones. NBC News got exclusive access to one mother's fight to get her 6-year-old son out of government custody. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns joins us now from Tucson, Arizona. So, Dasha, this child was one of the almost 20,000 unaccompanied minors in HHS care, a number that's only expected to grow. What can you tell us about this family's experience?
Hey, Joe, good morning. We've all seen those heartbreaking images of children in government custody. Well, imagine being one of their parents. And in fact, about 80% of those children have a close family member living here in the United States, and about 40% of those family members are parents. And this week we spent time with one of them, a mother named Andrea from Venezuela. She fled her home country when she received threats on her life. Her son, her 6-year-old son, Juan Felipe, later followed along with his grandmother, his stepfather, and his half-brother. They all crossed the border together, but they were separated by Border Patrol, and Juan Felipe was deemed an unaccompanied minor and placed in government custody. Andrea spent a week trying to figure out where he was. She even flew to Tucson and went to Border Patrol headquarters there to see if she could find out more information. She was flagging down police cars, Border Patrol cars, got no information, went back home, then finally received a call from CBP asking her to calm down her child because he was crying and wouldn't get on a bus in order to be transferred to Health and Human Services care. She did that. She then got another call from Health and Human Services saying that Juan Felipe wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping, and wouldn't stop crying, again asking her to calm her child. And then finally a call from a foster mother because he was placed in a temporary foster home by Health and Human Services, asking her again to comfort him. When she finally found out he was in Phoenix, she immediately hopped on a plane and took matters into her own hands. We were there with her for that process. But I want you to hear her experience in her own words. Take a listen.
Nadie me decía, no decían ni si estaban o no estaban, no me decían nada, no le puedo dar información, no le puedo dar información. Llamaba 3 veces al día, en la mañana, en la tarde y en la noche.
What was it like to get those phone calls, hear your son crying on the other end of the line? What was that experience like for you?
Ay, eso me destrozó el alma, me destrozó porque era muy lindo porque él cuando lo iban a trasladar no se dejaba montar a la van, al bus y decía así, mi abuelita no.
Joe, it was a heartbreaking and emotional day, but at the end of that day, Andrea became one of the lucky ones. She was able to reunite with her son, and she went home with Juan Felipe. But there are thousands more parents struggling through this complicated and challenging system that's frankly overwhelmed right now, Joe.
That is good to hear, but also hard to hear how much of a struggle it is for these families. Now, you got to talk with someone who's working to help reunite families. What did they tell you about how all this is being handled?
Yeah, Dr. Amy Cohen, she's the director of Every Last One, a nonprofit helping to reunite families. She actually traveled with Andrea. She was her advocate through this process. Again, Andrea, very lucky in this situation because of those circumstances. But Dr. Amy Cohen, she interviewed parents under the zero tolerance policy during the Trump administration, and she's working with families now. She says the trauma that she sees in these families are similar across both administrations, both experiences. And she says this system needs to change. Listen to what she had to say. How do these two administrations compare in terms of what you're actually seeing, the realities of what these kids and these families are facing?
So I think that the Biden administration, its intentions are sincere when it talks about wanting to expedite the release of these children. But the reality is that the system they're turning to is an entrenched system which is frankly incapable of pivoting to rapid releases of children. So the reality of what we're seeing is that children are being kept, more children are being kept for even longer in facilities that are enormous, that are warehousing them, that are exposing them to tremendous risks, both psychologically and medically.
Health and Human Services says one of the biggest challenges right now is that the ratio of case managers to children has gotten much worse as these numbers have grown so rapidly, but they're working as quickly as possible to staff up, Joe.
So quickly then, Dasha, just how common are these reunions?
Well, the reunions right now are much less common than the parents who are struggling to get through the system. Joe, we actually had a phone call with a father as he dialed into the government hotline that parents are told to call when they're looking for their children. And let me tell you, we spent about an hour and a half listening to hold music. And when the father finally got through to somebody, he was told that this process requires, quote, patience and serenity, that they could not disclose where his children were because of confidentiality reasons, that he simply needed to wait to be contacted by a case manager. And you can imagine the frustration, the desperation in that father, Joe.
Yeah, it's got to be hard. Dasha, thank you so much for shining a light on these stories. We appreciate it.
Coming up, the next installment of our NBC series on American extremism.
How pandemic stress pushed some people to the brink and the friends and family helping them find peace. Next.
Now to our network-wide series, American Extremism. The recent rise in violence, coupled with the stress brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, has radicalized many. That's where Parents for Peace steps in. The organization is dedicated to helping families and friends intervene in the lives of loved ones with extremist attitudes, with the hope of drawing them away from hate. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson has the story.
Do you know if he's ever condoned violence?
At Parents for Peace, the phones keep ringing.
When COVID happened, our helpline tripled.
Executive Director Miriam Churchill says it's not just because of the pandemic.
Did the events of January 6th have any impact on your helpline that you could see?
Yes, the helpline number was just hot.
On the line, people who want to get their loved ones out of all kinds of hate groups, ideologies from white supremacy to Islamic radicalism.
People that are using hate, they are self-medicating themselves with hate. I think it's an addiction.
It's why they do interventions, these days on Zoom. And we were granted rare access to listen in as their caller joined on speakerphone.
We agree, your husband needs help.
I appreciate the support.
We're obscuring her identifying details, but can say she wants help for her husband, who drinks, goes online, and sinks deeper into hate.
He would say that, if half the population were wiped out, things would be better.
Was there a point when you saw that your husband was getting increasingly radicalized?
Yeah, I would say it was after the Capitol riots.
She searched and found the Parents for Peace website, which features a photo of a former white supremacist.
I thought, wow, if only I could just get him in the same room with my husband, this is what might be able to reach him better.
That person is Chris Buckley. He says he joined the KKK in 2013 after he left the Army following a bad Humvee crash and got addicted to painkillers, then crystal meth.
You were actually training other members of the Klan to fight.
Yep.
A 2015 documentary shows Buckley with his then preschool-age son.
White power!
I was grooming him. He threw a fit until we made him a robe that matched mine.
In 2016, his wife reached out for help, and within weeks, another former white supremacist showed up at Buckley's door for an intervention.
It was the most agonizing, exhausting, emotional roller coaster that I've ever been on.
Buckley is now helping others out of hate.
For every one that I recruited while I was in, I can take 10 more back.
New research from RAND shows stigmatizing extremists or punishing them can be counterproductive. So Parents for Peace looks for other ways to help people who love people who hate.
We are guiding families to be first responders.
Like that helpline caller who's separating from her husband.
This is a shock to his system, but it's starting to have the effect that I hoped for him, is that he's reaching out for help now. That's why I'm trying to do what I'm doing with love, because what else can combat hate better than love?
For her, now it's hope over hate. Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Washington.
100 days ago, rioters stormed the Capitol seeking to overturn the presidential election. 5 died in the wake of the chaos, and those who survived will never forget the terror. NBC's Frank Thorpe gathered the recollections of many who were in the building on January 6th, which we'll be sharing throughout the day here on NBC News Now. One of those taking part in the project, Senator Mitt Romney, a target of the mob. Here's what he had to say.
In fact, in the days leading up to the 6th, my wife expressed concern that I not return to the Capitol. Her feeling was I might not be safe there, given the reports of a gathering that had been called by the president. I convinced her that I would have sufficient security and I would take sufficient precautions to be safe, but she was still very anxious. And so what happened was not out of the expected. My operations guy texted me that the protesters had entered the Capitol.
Protesters are in the building.
And so I left the Senate chamber, where I encountered Officer Goodman, who suggested I return to the chamber because that would be the safest place. Not terribly long after that, a official came into the chamber and said, "You need to evacuate." And that's when I was most frustrated and angry. Angry at those who had gone along with the big lie and told the American people that the election had been stolen. I pointed to a couple of people who had participated in that ruse and said, "You have caused this." I hope that I and others who come here will remember that when we succumb to untruths as a nation, that it can lead to violence and even death, as it did. And I have encouraged the architect of the Capitol to maintain some of the broken glass and other damaged elements of the Capitol so that it will be kept in memory for visitors for not just the near term, but for centuries from now.
There will be more Morning News Now right after this quick break. Tomorrow, the royal family will say a final goodbye to Prince Philip as he is laid to rest. To comply with COVID-19 safety regulations, the 30 people attending the service in person will wear masks and socially distance. That includes the Queen, Prince William, and Prince Harry, and other close family members. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons joins us now from Windsor Castle with the latest. Hi, Keir. Good morning.
Savannah, good morning to you. Behind me, St George's Chapel, where the actual funeral service will take place tomorrow. The front pages of the British newspapers today headlining with the news that Prince William and Prince Harry will be apart through the funeral and the funeral service. Another concentrating on the Queen herself, saying that she will pause beside Prince Philip's coffin for one last look of love.
In just over 24 hours, Prince Philip will be laid to rest in St George's Chapel, a day of family goodbyes, military honours and history. The funeral will begin at 11 a.m, 6 a.m. Eastern, when the coffin will be brought from the private chapel at Windsor Castle to the state entrance. At 2:40 here, 9:40 Eastern, it will be placed in a modified Land Rover that Prince Philip himself created. He had a passion for design.
Yes, it's easy enough to do a functional design, but you've got to add something to it.
At 2:45, 9:45 Eastern, the hearse will proceed through a route lined by military personnel to arrive 8 minutes later at the west steps of St. George's Chapel, where the Royal Marines will lift the coffin and carry it inside. The funeral will take place at 3 p.m., 10 a.m. Eastern, following a national minute of silence. Buckingham Palace has revealed the 30-person guest list and the formation of those walking behind the hearse. His children, Princess Anne and Prince Charles, will be followed by Prince Edward and Prince Andrew. Coming after will be his grandchildren, Prince William and Prince Harry, though they will be separated by their cousin, Peter Phillips. The two famously walked with their grandfather at Princess Diana's funeral. It is the first time William and Harry would have been seen together since the explosive Oprah interview. The Queen will travel in a Bentley behind the procession, and in perhaps the most poignant moment of a day filled with meaning, during the ceremony, she will sit alone.
And the Queen will be alone, of course, because of those coronavirus restrictions. The Archbishop of Canterbury here, though, today, urging people to have compassion for the Queen, saying, of course, she will have courage, she will have dignity, Savannah, but saying people should also remember that she is saying goodbye to her husband of 73 years, Savannah.
73 years. Kier, thank you so much.
This morning, we're launching a new weekly roundup of stories to help make your life a little easier. Here's NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen with this edition of Good to Know.
Good morning, Joe and Savannah. Say goodbye to your likes on Insta. The social media platform is conducting a small test, giving people more control over where they see likes on posts. This time, users will have 3 options when it comes to likes. You can choose not to see like counts on anyone's posts, turn them off for just your posts, or keep everything as is. Looking to make some extra cash? Uber is hiring. The rideshare company says customer demand is so high, Uber is offering $250 million worth of sign-up bonuses and other perks for existing and newly approved drivers. Security experts have been warning us not to post photos of our vaccination cards, like these ones, since they have important personal information on them. But now health experts are saying don't laminate them either. Doctors say immunity from the vaccine isn't yet fully understood, and we might need to get an additional booster in the coming months. That means more information to add to your card, so keep it safe and don't laminate it. If you want to host a house party, don't count on Airbnb to help. The home share company is cracking down on those summer soirees. The company announced guests without a history of positive reviews will be prohibited from making one-night reservations in the U.S. during the July 4th weekend. The next time you order Domino's, a robot might be delivering that pepperoni pizza. The robot named R2 is only available in the Houston area right now for Domino's, but the company says robot delivery could be coming to a city near you sometime very soon. I'm Vicki Nguyen for NBC News Now with this week's Good to Know.
You know, Joe, that last one was good for me to know because I order Domino's a fair amount.
I feel like they're not going to go through New York. I don't see that going on, but you never know.
You never know, exactly.
Right,
but it was good to know.
It is good to know. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.